Revived Thoughts is a production of Revive Studios.
This is Troy and Joel, and you are listening to Revive Thoughts.
Disaster, like the rain, falls on the just and the unjust. The horror of it strikes one dumb, and when speech returns, a hurricane of questions rises to the lips.
Every episode, we bring you a different voice from history in a sermon that they delivered. This sermon that we're about to listen to was given during the bombings of London during World War II. I think we might be setting a record for... It's definitely neck and neck with one of the more recent sermons that we do. Is Bonhoeffer the most recent?
No. You forgot Watchman Nee in like the late 1950s. But because he was in China, his sermons didn't get translated till way later, and none of it was recorded. Yeah. So he technically is our latest cap. But I don't think you'll ever really hear a sermon later than World War II unless it's a situation like that, because we just don't. We don't have any. By that point, it's getting recorded. Radio sermons and stuff exist, and you would be able to go listen to it. And why would we've had people? I remember very early on. I think most people get it now, but we had people like, "Why don't you have John MacArthur or R.C. Sproul or something?" I'm like, "Why? You can go listen to them. Like, you don't need. Why would you go? Why would you ask for a sermon by us when you can listen to the voice of the person who actually preached it? I imagine his voice is the best one to listen to for his sermons."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you weren't aware, that's kind of one of the rules we have on the show is that. No audio recordings of that person can exist because, again, you would just go listen to them. So we're reviving the old thoughts that need audio deliveries for it, and so that kind of puts our cap again towards the invention of radio and the microphones.
And technically, William, this guy from today, he does have like one or two audios out there, but they're not of this sermon, and they're not really full sermons and stuff. So I think he still counts. He would have probably, those shorter sermons would have made great revived radio sermons back in the day when we had that fun podcast, where we used to do the radio sermons, so the ones that your grandma and grandpa would have listened to on the radio. That was a cool one. I still wish I had time for that show because I think it was some good stuff, man. But cool. But anyway, all right, so that's William E. Sangster. You are correct, though. He really is one of our later. He won't get much later than this. And I was really drawn into this sermon because it was preached during bombing runs in World War II in London. And I don't know, I always picture that moment in Chronicles of Narnia when the little kids are running to the little bomb shelter. I don't know if you remember that movie, if you've heard of Chronicles of Narnia, Joel. I
read the books. I do not remember really anything from any of those movies.
It's a good movie.
I might have watched them at one point, but
we watched it with our kids, and they loved it a lot. And in that beginning scene, there's like a bombing run, and they have to run, and that was for me as a kid, and then watching it with my kids, that was kind of like a wow. Can you imagine, waking up in the middle of the night and running to a bomb shelter because the enemy's dropping bombs on you? It was pretty powerful stuff.
I'm glad to know your entire reference for the Battle of Britain comes to you from a scene at the beginning of Chronicles of Narnia movie.
Excuse me, I'm gonna push back on that, Joel. I think there's a lot of us who I think it's not just me who's gonna remember that.
That's pretty much. That's the only frame of reference you need. You don't need any.
They nailed it, and after that, what else is there to say? Chronicles of Narnia, Disney 2004 movie. What else is there to say? Okay. Oh, you know what? Actually, though, there have been so many World War II movies, but I can't think of any Battle of London movies that have ever come down the pipe. So
yeah, I mean, I can think of old ones.
I guess what would the movie be about, though? I mean, you can't really do anything. It's just like, there's got to be some fighters, though, that probably fought up in the sky. That could probably make an interesting movie.
Yeah, I think there's literally a movie called The Battle for Britain that's about fighters fighting above
Battle for Britain movie.
But it's like 60s or something.
Yeah, 1969. Am I supposed to remember that one? I wasn't alive then, Joel. So you know what? Hollywood, when you make the new Battle for Britain 2 and you put all your special effects and Godzilla in it or whatever, you send a slice of that check back to Old Revive Studios because you heard it from us first, okay? Just send a little piece of that our way because it was our idea and we reminded you of it. So that's all I'm asking for. Joel, some positive responses to Revive Thoughts, which are shocking when we put out quality like this. On X, we had somebody say, I heard Revive Thoughts about 6 months ago and has become one of my favorite podcasts. That was from Physics Phantasm. I'm pretty sure that was the name his parents gave him, and I'm grateful. Thank you so much for listening. We're really glad, Mr. Phantasm, to have you, and we are appreciative when people tell us that. So not only is it cool to hear that you've been listening for a while, but it's also, 6 months, but like you kept going. But it's also pretty cool to hear that we became one of your favorites. That just is an honor. Nick says, wait, what do you mean we listeners were, quote, surprisingly cool? Yeah, so in our first episode back from the season break, I mentioned that I met a lot of listeners over the summer, and Nick is actually a listener I have met in the past before. I also met him. I knew him through the podcast, and through some different means, we met a couple summers ago. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate him calling me out and being like, oh, we're surprisingly cool. You weren't sure if we would be cool. But to be fair, when I first pitched the idea of this show to people, everyone thought that this would appeal to the nerdiest of nerdy people. And, like a Hebrew professor would probably be the only person who'd want to meet with me. But joke's on them. All the people I've met from the show so far are actually, all of them, now that I think about it, are younger people. Like, I don't think hardly any of them are over 40 that I've met that know me.
That's true. Yeah, we have a pretty young audience.
All of them are under 40, and all of them are cool. So take that. I haven't met one Hebrew professor because of this show, but I've only met cool young people. So, so I apologize for my surprisingly, but so I appreciate that, Nick. Appreciate Nick. Also, that's the same Nick who just read our Savonarola sermon, and he actually, when Joel and I were talking before the show, I put Nick into our inbox because we were discussing like how we get our episodes out of the emails, and I realized Nick has read so many sermons for us because his name comes up a lot. Like he has William Wilberforce, Samuel Hopkins. He might have helped us with, it looks like possibly, no, it wasn't George Matheson. That was a person named Nick asking for that one. He's done a Calvin sermon for us. He did the Peter Kierkegaard sermon. What a great sermon. The Ephraim the Syrian sermon. I mean, this guy, Nick, has preached so many sermons. John Flavel. So thank you, Nick, for all the episodes you've done. I'm sorry I was surprised everyone was cool. Okay.
And as a reminder, if you would like to read a sermon, write in revivethoughts@gmail.com, or you can check us out on our website, revivethoughts.com. And we'd love to get you plugged in and connected narrating some sermons.
And if you'd like to meet us, I'm not in town, but just come on out to Indonesia, and I'd be happy to get to know you. And then, Joel, you are in town, so they'll have to go find you in the meantime. It might be a while before I'm in America, but we'd love to meet you and then say you were surprisingly cool.
William E. Sangster. When I see his name, I'm compelled to say Sangster, but there's no A in there. I don't know why my brain inserts that letter.
Sangster sounds like the name of like a ghost from like a second grade Goosebumps or something. Like
it sounds like a cooler name to me. Yeah, it sounds like a more formidable person, the Sangster. Sangster, William E. Sangster.
Which probably wasn't William E. Sangster either, because he's from London, so it was probably, I don't know, something posh, like, William E. Sangster is probably how they said it over there.
No doubt. Born in the year 1900 in London, England, and we have these excerpts from his autobiography, growing up, that give us decent insights into how he saw the world, and it is one of him wanting to be a minister. He says, quote, "I believe that I was born to be a minister. I cannot recall a time in my life when I was without a sense of holy vocation. It did not derive from any conviction in the mind of my parents, who had never been so much as entertained by the thought, but I felt the pressure of a directing hand upon me from my tenderness of years," end quote. A few more quotes we have from him about his early years. He says, "In my teens, seeking what I came to regard as a deeper and more personal experience of God, I drifted from the church of my baptism and early training and associated with the people called Methodists. And when the time came for me to join the army on my 18th birthday, I was already a local preacher." So he would end up going to the army. This would have been, I guess, World War I.
Yeah, that's correct. So he would have been a young man, and he's born in 1900, so around the age of 18, World War I is still in the thick of it.
Yeah, he says, quote, "Army life tested me and deepened me. The strange man upon the cross haunted and held me all of the time. I came out of the army convinced that his way was the only way, and I offered myself for the Methodist ministry. I had 4 years of training in college, and I was put on sound lines of scholarship," end quote. So on his way in line for scholarship. I also do think it's good to include a little footnote here. Methodist back then of how he's thinking about this is very different than how people in America might think of Methodists in today's day and age. Very different churches.
If you don't know your history very well, the Methodist movement today is very different than the Methodist movement back then was, and it's very much, I think, a turn for the worse. He's not the first pastor we've had on the show that served in the First World War. We have talked about a guy named Henry Van Dyke. He served in the Navy, kind of as an older man preaching to the naval soldiers on ships. We also had talked about J. Gresham Machen. He heroically, this 40-something-year-old professor of Princeton, went off to serve in the YMCA. He'd meet these soldiers coming back from the front, like right there. His tent was right next to the front, and would give them stuff. And he would work 12, 15, 16-hour days, just crazily trying to keep these poor guys with hot chocolates and some food and stuff as they recovered from coming in from the trenches. And I always loved J. Gresham Machen's story because he was a famous Princeton professor already. Like, his life was good. He didn't have to go do this. But he sat on the front line, like basically on the front lines. At one point, he had to like run from a bridge that was exploding behind him. He had gas attacks would hit where they were sometimes. And it was miserable. And he would have these just 2-person Bible studies with soldiers that, I mean, you got to, in these giant encampments, only 2 people would show up. And I just think, man, that is heroic service for God to be, this elevated man, but he's willing to, serve so low. And then we have Oswald Chambers was another one. He went and preached to the soldiers in Egypt. And sadly, he got kind of a medical issue that he died. And he didn't die because of World War I, but if he had been in England and not next to the front lines of Egypt when he had that medical episode, I do wonder if he would have been handled better. Maybe he still would have died, but it's certainly questionable if that was the best place for him. William Sangster, though, I do think he is the first time we've had a soldier, like he was an actual soldier in the trenches that we've ever had on the show, because he's just a later, we don't normally have people this late in the show. So he has that unique aspect going for him. When you think of the terrors of the Great War, when you think of the horrible trenches and the things that you stick your head up and you get shot and you're just out there for, all the terrible things that happen, is truly amazing that anybody survived that. That is what he would have been serving in that kind of position. And the fact that you could say, man, when he says that the cross haunted me, like, it's amazing he came out of that with any humanity at all. But it seems that the Lord got his, was able to get his heart during those times. But as a person preaching to people, holding, like, just in that kind of situation, I can only imagine what that would have been like. He married his wife, Margaret. It was a bit unclear for me when. When I put in his name, like, even usually you'll find at least a Wikipedia page to kind of give you birth dates and, marriage names and stuff like that, to kind of at least get you started on this guy's life. But no, not him. There's another William E. Sangster that was like a 1800s activist, and he took this guy's slot. So I don't know where this guy, the preacher, was, but he didn't seem to have a page, even though he seemed like a pretty important person that should have a page. Well, a very strange biography, very recent, guy who had a really important impact in the world, who somehow doesn't have as much information out there about him. And it's just weird because, again, like, it makes sense to me. In the 1700s, random pastor whose, birth date and death date is unknown doesn't get okay, I can see why he might not have a lot of articles and stuff written on him. But this guy was, there are people alive today who were alive at the same time as this guy. It seems weird to me that running one of the biggest churches in London in his era, he has almost no discernible biography out there that's easy to grab.
What we do kind of have documented from him is his time pastoring a church in London. And this was one of the largest churches in London, and he took the job in 1938. And this is, again, in the months and years leading up to World War II and the raids, the bombing raids that would happen on this. And he's right in the middle of London. So this is prime target, prime air raid zone. And so can you imagine a ministry in which daily you are having to take cover and take refuge in a bomb shelter while you wait for the planes to pass over? Now, the bombings were usually at nighttime, so I don't imagine he's usually interrupting the morning services, although I suppose they probably could as well. But still, just imagine going out and looking up, and these raids are 300 to 500 planes on average, right? Imagine looking up and seeing 500 giant bomber planes dropping thousands of tons of explosives on your city. What a terrifying thought. And not just that day, the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And it went on for like a 2-year stretch of pretty consistent bombings. And you would have air raid sirens. There was people that would be able to spot the planes coming and sound the sirens and allow you guys to take cover. And so, they were minimizing casualties as much as possible. But even still with that, they say over 21,000 people died in these bombings, let alone how many homes were lost and structures were ruined because of the bombing of London. So a very unique time to be in the peak of your ministry. This was his prime preaching era, and this is the environment that he's doing it in. So very different than what is hard. It's hard for me to wrap my head around what that would be like. Very foreign.
Not just during the infamous Blitz, by the way, Germany bombed London multiple times. So I didn't realize how many times they just start bombing London. And they also used rockets. The very early rockets that the world knew, shooting something in the sky were invented so that Germany could bomb poor London in 1944 and in 1945. And again, I just one instance of this in just one night alone in 1940, 100,000 bombs, which all of them were kind of designed that like when they hit the ground, it would start a fire. So were dropped on the city all at once. And we mentioned dead people, but that doesn't include injuries, right? I mean, if you survived the house falling over, but you broke your arm or you went blind or whatever, you got hit in the head. Well, you didn't die, so you wouldn't have counted in the death. I mean, so the number of people going through that, absolutely crazy. So imagine trying to be a pastor, preaching to this. Your congregant sons are dying in a war over there in those horrible trenches. Maybe you've given some of those funerals. Your neighbors and maybe even some of your parishioners. In fact, his church was about 2,000 people. So certainly some of his congregants would have died by some of these bombing raids. It would really just make you think each sermon you preach truly could be the last sermon they ever hear. And sometimes while preaching, the bombs would start falling. We mentioned this happened to Martin Lloyd-Jones and G. Campbell Morgan as well in the sermon that we pulled over by them, but where they actually were preaching when a bomb went off and like almost, shook the church. But Sangster, he would usually be preaching. Once the bombs started falling, a lot of times he'd end the service and be like, okay, we're going to have to end early because the bombs are going off. But not always. And I kind of like this about him. Other times he preached and he would say, quote, "Those who have a nervous disposition may leave now if they like." And then he would just continue the service as the bombs are falling and the sirens are going off. Man, what do you do in that situation? Do you leave? I'm scared, or do you stay and like I'm super faithful? But I mean, like if the bomb does go off, then that's kind of a bummer. I think today you wouldn't even hear a pastor give you that option, right? You'd immediately say go home quickly. But I do love that he's like, if you're scared, you can go home. I guess you coward. Well, now I can't go home the way you said it like that. Oh man. So and so he was a good guy too, though. He opened his church's basement as a bomb shelter every night. So people who for whatever reason their home was inaccessible or maybe they were homeless or something like that, they had a place to shelter for 5 different years. And him and his wife stayed in that basement with these people, ministering to them, taking care of their needs, sharing the gospel with them so that they could be able to do ministry for people who otherwise would have nowhere to go and could be in danger. As a person, he was kind of considered old-fashioned, kind of even Puritanish. Like I read one person said basically he was like the last Puritan of the Methodists. He was very popular, though. He was just very much like people loved him. Again, 2,000 people are going to his sermons during World War II. I mean, he was a beloved guy. He was pretty much the last true conservative of the Methodist movement, and it was drifting very liberal. As we kind of mentioned, the Methodists are very different today than they used to be. And he's kind of seen as the last one in England that was still holding down the fort. He wrote books on preaching, and he had some advice. I listed a few of them. First one, don't steal sermons. I really like that one. And you may say that's ironic because you're running a podcast where you steal. No, I don't steal the sermons. I give credit, and we mention who they are. We read the biography. But people stealing sermons, as someone who's seen it happen in real life, like I've seen this happen in person. I've heard famous pastors get caught stealing sermons. It's a bad thing, and I appreciate that this was a problem 70 years ago as well. Before Google, people were running, I guess, to the libraries and stealing sermons. We've covered that on our shows before, but I saw that piece of advice. I'm like, yes, good. The average pastor today, you're going to be tempted to steal that sermon. ChatGPT it. Don't do it. All right, Sangster saying, don't do it. Stay away from the plague of trying to say something new or always interpreting the text to mean something it doesn't. Boy, so true. You might get out there and you're like, I got to preach something that's going to be new, right? I got to preach something people haven't heard before, so it's worth listening to. Or I got to preach, you think the text says this, but really it means this thing. He's like, don't do that. Just be faithful. Just interpret it correctly. Even if it's the same thing they've heard before, that's okay. Don't try to make something happen that's not there. He also recommended reading a lot, but to not be showy about it, which I also appreciate. I think we live in an era where people, if they even read books, they probably only read books from their very narrow camp of like approved people. But Sangster was a big fan of reading a lot of different people, reading the people you disagree with so you know how better to answer them. And I think that's really, really good advice that we could all use. So read a lot, but then don't be showy about it. Don't be like, don't be the guy who shows off how much he reads. Just, mention it as it's needed. In his final years, Sangster got a debilitative muscular atrophy disease that just was very, very painful for him. And in his last year, he couldn't speak at all, which if you lived your life as a preacher, sharing the gospel, you've been through World War I, you preached your way through World War II bombings. I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been to spend your final year just not able to communicate at all. You could write stuff down, but you couldn't preach. You couldn't do what God, had called you to do. So that was probably quite the hardship for him. But friends and family said he handled it, very, very well. Now you can listen to a sermon, and we believe this sermon was preached during those World War II years. Perhaps in the background, you can imagine the sirens going off, the bombs going off, maybe halfway through the sermon, and then you could imagine him kind of looking up and going, if you're scared, if you have a nervous disposition, you are free to go. A pastor doing that today, it just would be something.
Not everything happens in the world just as God wishes. When people say, whatever is best, they cannot really mean what they say, or they mean it with certain conditions and reservations, which change the literal meaning from the words. If, in simple truth, whatever is best, then this is paradise, and as Leibniz argued, the best of all possible worlds. But we find that hard to believe, even when we give the closest heed to the German philosopher's reasoning and allow that a little bitter is often more pleasing than sugar. Is evil merely a privation, a deficiency, a limitation? The shading of the picture or the discord in the music just added to heighten and enhance the effect? Can we say with Browning, the evil is null, is not, is silence implying sound? Voltaire makes merry over Leibniz's reasoning and gives it as his opinion that this is the worst of possible worlds, and while we shrink back from that absurd caricature, we cannot feel that this is paradise now. Sin seems too positive. Evil leaves its slimy trail over so much that might be fair and beautiful. We pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, because, as yet, the correspondence of earth and heaven is far from complete. I met a friend one day, a minister returning from a funeral. Even allowing for the sad errand which had occupied his mind, he seemed peculiarly low-spirited. I have just buried a child, he said, and the child's father is under arrest for manslaughter. Last Saturday evening, it seems, he came home drunk, clambered into the bed where his wife and the little one were asleep, and in his confused condition pushed the baby out of the bed. It fell, and as it fell, the child's head struck the corner. In the gray light of the next morning, they found the little body cold and dead upon the floor. The police were called, of course, and the father is in prison awaiting trial. But that wasn't the whole of it, my friend went on. After the service, one of the mourners, trying to make a little pious talk in the minister's presence, said, "Oh, well, it can't be helped, I suppose. It was the will of God." "The will of God?" said my friend bitterly. "That wasn't the will of God. God could never have desired for that dear child to be shoved into death by a drunken brute. It was a horrible travesty of all that God would have wished for that little one." As we parted, I turned the old problem over in my mind again. What happens to the guidance of God when calamity comes? Calamity isn't always the outcome of obvious sin. It overtakes the saints. Untimely death has ended the life of the noblest souls, and not death merely, but often death through agonizing pain. Thomas Arnold, the great headmaster and educator, the friend of God and of children, struck down at 47 with angina pectoris. F.W. Robertson, fearless thinker and friend of the working man, passed out at 37 with a terrible brain abscess. Henry Drummond, whom Ian McLaren called the most perfect Christian I have known or expect to see this side of the grave, died at the age of 46 after 2 years on his back in pain. And that isn't even the problem at its worst. Hardly a year passes, but some great disaster stuns the public mind. The Tay Bridge disaster, the ramming of the Victoria, the sinking of the Titanic, the wreck of the Hindenburg. No easy answer leaps to our lips. The man who finds in all such disasters the judgment of God on a wicked people is both unconvincing and inhuman. Godly souls perish in such an hour, and these calamities visit a thrifty and industrious people as well as a lazy and frivolous one. Disaster, like the rain, falls on the just and the unjust. The horror of it strikes one dumb, and when speech returns, a hurricane of questions rises to the lips. Does God guide us? Is there knowledge in the Most High? Does he lead us to the lip of a calamity and leave us to fall in? The problem demands an attempt at an answer because any day might thrust it on our notice again, and because it challenges faith. If anguish comes, can doubt be far behind? It is the opinion of the preacher that the perfect will of God is constantly thwarted by human ignorance, stupidity, carelessness, and sin. No other view seems tenable as one looks at this chaotic world. It is a consequence of God's great gift to men of freedom, and without that freedom we should be marionettes and not men. We are born, moreover, into a society and a world where the perfect will of God has been held back for ages, and we are bound up in the bundle of life with our fellows. We gain immeasurably from these relationships. We can love one another, serve, help, and influence one another, but necessarily we can also harm one another too. We could not have the blessing without the risk of the pain. God allowed this risk. Everything sweet in this life has come to us from others. Our mothers suffered pain to give us birth. Our fathers worked for us. When we were ill, doctors and nurses bent their strength and skill to make us better, and our dear ones turned night into day as they watched at our side. Nor were we allowed to grow up untutored in mind or soul. We were educated. All that clever men and women had ever discovered or thought was put before us in ways we could take in, and the best the world has ever learned in things spiritual was made attractive too. We learned the name of Jesus. The imperishable stories of the Bible were spoken over us. And all along the path of life, precious things, the most precious, have come to us from other people. Friendship, counsel, encouragement, love streaming in on us from others, because God has set us here in a great family of life and made us so that our lives intertwine. It should not surprise us, in the light of all we gain, that there is some risk of loss as well. When God made us so that we could love and help one another, he exposed his family to the possibility that we would hate and harm one another. This was by necessity. The one goes with the other. And when sin came in, with its long trail of sorrow and suffering, we can now be hurt at any time by the folly, carelessness, or crime of another. But would you rather live in a world in which that couldn't happen? Do you wish God had made us so that we could never influence each other, never be friends, never guide, comfort, or help each other, never love? It would be a hateful and unendurable existence, loathsome to us all. God's will, we believe, for his children is the perfection of their characters and their ultimate bliss, but the cast of our inherited nature and the conditions of a sin-spoiled world do not allow an easy path to that great end. God therefore permits the woes of life to press upon us, the consequences of our own sin, and sometimes the sin of others, the consequences of our carelessness and ignorance, and the carelessness and ignorance of others. The loss of the Titanic was due to reckless racing through an ice field, and the death roll was lengthened by the fact that she only carried boat accommodations for 1,200 people, though the passengers and crew totaled 2,293. It was a compound of pride and criminal folly. A good man named W.T. Stead was among the passengers, going to America in the interests of world peace and to take part in the Men and Religion Forward movement. He was drowned. Yet God meets us in every situation, hears the cry which our bleeding hearts fling to him, and bears with us when, in bitterness, we question his restraint, deny his love, and doubt his existence. Granted a willing and responsive heartedness, he can so turn tragedy to triumph and loss to gain that men have even believed that he sent the pain and devised the disaster, so marvelously does he bring good out of evil. Think how closely joy and pain are interwoven in the fabric of our human lives. Our achievements and love measure our capacity for pain. Before I knew my friend or cared for him, his doings were of no account to me. He'd pass me in the street with a frozen stare. I did not mind. He did not sympathize with me in my trouble, and I did not miss his sympathy. When success came to me, he sent no congratulations, but it did not make me sad. We were outside each other's circle, and we had no sense of lack. But when I learned to love my friend, I armed him with the power to wound me deeply. I put a weapon in his hand and exposed my heart to a vulnerable weakness. The more I loved, the more he could wound. If he ignores me now, I'm hurt. If he denies his sympathy, I miss it. If he lapses into sin, I share the shame. Love has made me vulnerable. It has exposed me to pain. Because pain and love are inextricably interwoven in the only kind of life we know. If sin had never spoiled this fair earth, if men had always done the perfect will of God, if our poor race had responded at every stage to the leading of the loving Father, anything might have happened then. Perhaps there would be no need of sympathy in such a world. Perhaps character would have grown without discipline. Perhaps love would never have been linked with pain. Perhaps and perhaps. But in this world, the only world we know, love and pain are interwoven. Mysteriously, they belong together. They are united at the very portals of life. There is nothing nobler and sweeter on this planet than a mother's love. But it is strangely compounded, and half its quality comes from this, that a mother goes down to the gates of death for her child. Joy impregnates, pain brings out, love is born. None can deny that the trouble-tossed and pain-racked people have often pioneered the way to a better world. John G. Peyton, toiling for Christ beside the lonely grave of his wife in Chadentana. Josephine Butler, bereft of her darling girl. Asa Hutchinson, the saint with a humpback. Nor is the truth well expressed if we say that they served well in spite of their woe. They served well because of it. They carried it to God, and God turned it into triumph. Many a life had been saved by the loss of the Titanic. The track of westbound steamers across the Atlantic was shifted further south, away from the dangerous ice fields. The obsolete Board of Trade requirements with regard to emergency boat accommodations were heavily revised. Several improvements in life-saving appliances were immediately made, and wireless, which was still in the early stages of its use, received the force which only tragedy can impart. We see the gains in individual lives as well. Commenting on the sorrows that beset Dr. R.W. Dale, Robertson Nichols says, "In him we fulfilled the great word that the men of sorrows are the men of influence in every walk of life." Carlyle comments on the sufferings of Dante in these words, "If all had gone well with them, Florence would have had another Lord Mayor, and our world would have lost the Divina Commedia. Of our friends, as well as of our Savior, we might say, 'Fruitful let your sorrows be,' and not only of our friends, but ourselves. What then will we say of guidance? If God's aim for us is character and not our swift enjoyment of some low way of life, should it surprise us that he does not intervene when sin or stupidity, folly or ignorance, our own or another's, brings us to the tough road? Will we question his love because he persists in treating us as persons and not puppets, and will not rob us of our freedom to save us from our woes? From many of these griefs and pains he could have and would have saved us if we had been more sensitive to his leading and responsive to his call. But in a world like ours, where we are close-knit in a great family circle and our lives are constantly affected by the deeds of others, it's impossible to think that he could save us from them all. And when we look at our own natures in the light of God, we would hardly desire it ourselves. Disappointment, pain, grief, and loss have taught us so much. If we had never walked down the tough road, we never would have found that he answers us there when we call. Some of the sweetest souls we have known have walked it longer and in far, far rougher places, but they say, he never ceased to guide. He knew the way, knew it at its worst. A hand like this hand reached me in the darkness and led me on. Like this hand, like and unlike. It was rough with work at a carpenter's bench and pierced with an ancient wound. Some are on the path with bitter hearts and lagging feet, and their lives, poor souls, are sour and unlovely. They have not found the guide, or rather, let the guide find them. The rebellion in their heart prevents it, and the cloud never seems to lift from their toilsome way. Because they do not follow the guide, they never reach the plains of light. They don't believe that it leads there. It does, always, to those who will follow the guide. It is really the path of opportunity. Guidance does not end when calamity begins. In every situation he meets us, out of every situation he can lead us to a greener pasture and a sphere of wider use. We can trust him in whom we have believed, but when calamity has us in its grip, even this strong thought is not enough of itself. We look the ugly intruder in the face, feel its power to steal the joy from half our life, and cast our whiny inquiries at God, demanding to know why it had to be. In that hour, the safeguarding of our freedom doesn't seem enough. In our bewilderment, we feel that a loving God would find effective discipline some easier way. We look at him through the mists of tears and wonder if in his greatness he really feels our woe. Then is that our Lord comes and shows us his feet, his hands, his side. And if there were a sign in every wound of Jesus, we know that it would say, have suffered. Then it is that we feel with Emerson, how near grandeur to our dust, how near is God to man. He has suffered. He does not simply reign in some far-off splendor, untroubled by our woe. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. The whole story of the Passion is rich in its power to bless. We go with him into Gethsemane and feel, even when our own sorrow is most vivid to our thought, that we have not drunk the cup of bitterness so deeply as this. In all the dark mystery of it, the shadows never seem so dark as they do in Gethsemane. The word agony is used of our Lord only in the garden. He was master of himself from the kiss of Judas till he cried with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. But in the garden, agony, the bloody sweat, the pleading prayer, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. So he prays, first on his feet, then on his knees, and then on his face. He knows it all, deeper, further than any of us. Beside his agony, our own seem to shrink, and every cross grows light beneath the shadow, Lord, of thine. Then the voices through the trees and the gleaming lanterns, Judas in his leprous kiss, poor Peter dragging the sword from beneath his garment and taking a blow at the nearest. He meant it for his head, but it only got his ear. The shouts, the trampled undergrowth, the scared disciples, and the inquisitive mob. But Jesus is master of the situation again. His will is perfectly attuned with the Father's. He's going right on by way of the cross. Turning on Peter, he ordered the sword back into its sheath and broke their last hopes of a spectacular conquest. He would not appeal to force. Do you think I cannot ask my Father, and he will even now send me more than 12 legions of angels? But he would not call them. He was taking the long way, but the only possible way, the way of love, and no pain would turn him back. There was no discord in these wills so perfectly attuned. He would conquer sin with love. He would make the cross a throne. He would use the shame and pain and humiliation of it to expose the very heart of God. And sin would not triumph. It would be but a dark background revealing, by contrast, the wonder of that love. So he takes the cross, not of compulsion, not by mere submission or resignation, but willingly. And when we see him there, we have our greatest aid to understanding how the calamities of life can be converted to our soul's use and the use of others. He takes it willingly. His arms are not merely stretched upon it, they are wounded around it. He holds it to him. He does not merely suffer it, he uses it. And so the symbol of shame becomes the focus point of glory. In that same willing spirit, he desires that we meet and use the calamities of life that overtake us. An evil that can be put right must be resisted. But those are not the problems we are considering now. There is a finality about bereavement, an amputated limb, an incurable disease, a lost fortune. The real crosses of life have to be borne. Can you hear the cross willingly? That will change it from a weight into wings. Cannot crush you. You rise by it. So by my woes to be nearer, my God, to thee, near to thee. Through the shadows he guides still and converts the loss into gain, working out of our folly and mistakes something which will be worthy of the price pain has paid. Thomas Erskine of Glenlothen says, "Many things appear and are irretrievable to us, but there is nothing irretrievable with God. This is a great gospel to my heart. He who knows how to take occasion from the fall to bring in the redemption may be safely trusted with each event and with every action, good and bad. I believe that love reigns and that love will prevail. I believe that he says to me every morning, begin again your journey in your life. Your sins, which are many, are not only forgiven, but they will be made by the wisdom of God the basis on which he will build blessings. So we believe. They will be made by the wisdom of God the basis on which he will build blessings. Our sins and our mistakes. Even the saddest of our mistakes, the ones we made when we listened for his guiding voice, but did not quite succeed in disentangling it from the voice of self-love, he will build a blessing on it. And in the light of heaven, the mysteries will be solved, the gains of our losses made clear, and fullest scope be found for the disciplined abilities we've developed on earth. Then I will see and hear and know all I desired and wished below, and every power find sweet employ in that eternal world of joy."
This sermon was very interesting to me. I think there will be people who will listen to this sermon and they might disagree with parts of it. And you know what? That's okay. I think we can listen to sermons and disagree with parts of it. But I will say what I do appreciate is he's not preaching this from the safety of an ivory tower. You know, he's not preaching this sermons on, times of calamity. What could it be like when things go wrong? You know, the professor saying that from the theoretical classroom. This guy's preaching this during World War II, during the era of bombs falling. What do my people who are losing loved ones right now need to hear? And they need to hear the hope of the gospel. They need to hear that God loves them. They need to hear that Jesus is the way out of this pain and comfort, this pain in this world and the comfort for this world. And I appreciate that he's very direct and that he's willing to say it and preach it to that. And I hope that pastors of churches near you, or that the people you know, or if you are a pastor listening, I hope you are just as direct with dealing with the issues of your day, and that when your people need help, when there's a time of calamity, I hope that we are all pointing our friends, our family, our loved ones, those around us, to the gospel and the need for Jesus Christ like he was as well. Because that's so many times when calamity happens, when things go wrong, people shrink back because they go, they're going through a hard time. I don't want to say anything to make it worse. And yet so many times calamities are the very moment when people are most open to hearing about God. They are most need to hear the good news. And sometimes we shrink back. We're scared to make things worse. And I think that we need to quote Sangster, not have a nervous disposition, but get in there and get it done. Tell people about God and share the good news with them so that they can be comforted.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Revived Thoughts. Today's sermon was narrated by John Raynar. Big thanks to John Raynar. We always love it when we get people that come back and read more sermons for us. It's always a delight, and John does a great job.
Yeah, John is awesome. John, really appreciate all the sermons he's done for us. Great voice, as you can tell. He does speaking and stuff. You can look up his website. He has that we've mentioned before on the show, where he does audio, and he's just always been very kind to us. And he's told us basically, I see this as a ministry, so I appreciate what you guys do. And in fact, John reached out to me and was kind of like, hey, what's the latest sermon? It's been a while since you've messaged. And I was like, John, let me get you something. And I really enjoyed this one. So grateful for your help on these episodes, John. You always do a great job.